All right, we are going to talk about more book. We have Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Kahneman? I don't know. This is somehow the only non-fiction book to make this list. Although I'd say I read fiction and non-fiction at roughly a 1-to-1 rate. Sometimes very deliberately at a 1-to-1 rate that I'll alternate between fiction and non-fiction books. But most of the time when I'm reading fiction, my goal is either to be like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, that's how an octopus works. Oh, really? Oh, cool. Oh, physics. I understand everything. Just kidding. Or I read nonfiction books that just make me go, yeah, fuck capitalism. It's either like very leftist political works or just kind of general interest science works. And I read this one thinking it would be in the latter category. But sometimes something comes along that just kind of changes the way you think forever in fiction, or in non-fiction books, sorry. Gödel Escher Bach was such a book for me. The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes was such a book for me. And this as well was such a book for me. I'll go run and get it. I might as well. If I have the books, I might as well grab them. Just so I can, read an excerpt or two if the mood strikes me. Let me have it with the pencil, as you just saw. From a very simple thesis comes just this unstoppable fountain of insight and curiosity and asking many, many questions too. What does this really mean? The thesis itself is that the brain functions on two systems. You can think of these kind of as your consciousness and subconsciousness, but it's a little different than that. It's a little more nuanced and specific. One is your automatic fast thinking, which I believe is called System 1 in this book, or maybe System 2. I always get mixed up what term they use for each. That I'll be talking about this book with some friends, and they'll be like, oh, no, you mean System 1, you mean System 1. But System 2, or System 1, the automatic system, is the one that does, things before you realize it. Like an example that sticks with me from the very start, we have two books here. One is smaller than the other, of course. But picking them up, I can intuitively say that this one is heavier than this one. It doesn't require conscious thought on my part. It doesn't require me to ask myself that question and articulate it. It's just simply a fact that I can observe. And the other one is much more deliberate. It's the mental voice in your head. It's something that has to break down, form questions, think about answers, put things together. And the surprise of this book, the main thing it's trying to get across, is how much is handled by the fast system when we think we're really thinking. When we think that we're making a conscious, deliberate choice, in fact, what we're actually doing is just responding to the choice that we've made automatically, that we've made quickly with the fast system. Our slow thinking is trying to rationalize that to ourselves and come up with a reason for why we're doing what we're doing. This is broken down in loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of examples. Some of them are hilarious. Some of them are kind of haunting, actually. There's a whole section on how poor people are at kind of thinking numerically, of kind of associating their decisions with the numeric facts at hand. An example they give is they had a big wheel. The wheel had a bunch of numbers on it. You span the wheel, it gave you a random number. And then right after, you were asked to estimate the height of a giant redwood tree. Which is, maybe like 1 in 10 people actually know that fact and can give a good estimate. But for all the people that are essentially just guessing, their guesses were always close to the number, or they were very highly correlated with being close to the number that they span. That this random number, that they saw themselves be random generated, just by implanting itself in their brain, somehow was used as like a starting point for coming up with the height of the tree. Isn't that amazing? But it's also kind of haunting. Another one was people being asked, how much money would you donate to save 10,000 birds from an oil spill? And they would say some number. And then people being asked, how much would you donate to save 100,000 birds from an oil spill, and that people would often say a lower number. That there's just this like poor scaling factor that the mind can't quite like work to like actually think of how big that number is. It's just that some numbers sound bigger or smaller to people, and then it like shot back up for like 1 million birds, but it wasn't like proportionally more or anything. So it's kind of haunting that you realize that people are making like major financial decisions, and unless they're going about it in a very rigorous way, if they allow themselves to slip into this fast thinking, if they allow themselves to succumb to these biases and stuff, the people just do stuff that doesn't make sense at all. Oh, it's crazy. The primary goal of the book is a very practical one. How do you overcome these biases of fast thought? How do you catch yourself thinking fast, recognize the shortcomings of this fast thinking, and account for them, and come up with something that actually makes sense? On this level, it really succeeds. And I kind of had a repulsion to the idea that this is a book for business people. This is a book for people in economics, because I don't care. I don't care about, you know, I don't want to be rich. I don't want to be successful in my career or anything. I don't give a shit. Anyways, so that part of it, like that sort of tone and approach was very off-putting for me. But despite that, I still found myself drawing upon the advice of this book and trying to keep it in mind when I was making these sorts of decisions. They have even these sections at the end of every chapter speaking of, in this case, Bernoulli's errors, or speaking of bad events, speaking of regression to the mean. And these are like example sentences you could use in the office to try to motivate you into thinking of when you can use this. He was very happy with a 20,000 bonus 3 years ago, but his salary has gone up by 20% since, so he will need a higher bonus to get the same utility. A perfectly functional statement that has nothing to do with any sort of life I aspire to or desire or respect. But it's kind of, it's... But I still think about utility. I still think about how people perceive utility, you know, when I'm thinking. So it worked. It worked for me, even though I don't like the sort of people that it was aimed at. But yeah, we'll need the help. We'll need the help on this practical level, because the prevailing emotional response I get when I read this is like, uh-oh. It's no wonder that the world is in the state it's in when the brain is so bad at all this stuff. The brain is like a dumb, clumsy, hopeless thing when it comes to so much of our decision making, so much of how we see the world. Please try to think of this as endearing. I think if you can laugh at it, if you can kind of take an absurdist approach to this and just be like, wow, then it's kind of endearing just how hilariously bad people are at a lot of these mental evaluations. Otherwise, it gets really depressing. It gets kind of bleak. What really sticks out for me, though, isn't this sort of practical aspect, isn't these very experimental catching biases and stuff, but the more mysterious things in this book. Diving deep into consciousness, into religious thought, into the ideomotor, which is the idea of the sort of things you're thinking will influence how you move your body, how your entire body is functioning. They give an example that will always stick out in my mind, where they had participants were given a list of words, and they had to make the words into a small sentence, like a little story. And some of the participants were given words that were like elderly, cane, I don't know, Florida, I think was one example. Something that calls to mind elderly people, basically, that they're very likely to tell a story about an old person. And other people were given just anything else. And the people who had to write a story about the elderly walked more slowly down the hall to deliver their papers than the people who wrote stories about other stuff. Isn't that amazing? And you might think, oh yeah, that makes sense. But really think about it. What is going on there? They're not choosing to walk slower. It's just that their mind has been put into this place where the conscious thinking of elderly people has influenced the subconscious moving of the body. That to me is just so mind-blowing, and taps into these really dark, deep, mysterious questions about consciousness. Like what is going on up there? It's so interesting. This connects to like the deepest and wildest theories we can have about consciousness. Like I mentioned that other book, The Breakdown of the Conscious Mind, the Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes. I like trying to say it really fast because it sounds so obnoxious. But it's a book that just posits a theory of how consciousness works and how it emerges. And it's really fascinating, but it's kind of weird and wild and not super standardized. And there's a million such theories of consciousness. There's a million things you can read. And this book does an amazing job of bridging the gap between being able to like ask those questions and get into those topics, but in a way that it's all practical. It's all very evidenced. It's all very rigorous studies that you can start to think about these things from a place that you feel secure, that you feel like I am doing like intellectual work. Isn't that cool? Damn, this book is a banger. Anyways, right, moving on. Next. Oh, wait. It gives you hope, yeah. I think more than reading any other books about the consciousness that are much more like theoretical, much more kind of abstract, this one gives me hope that eventually all will be brought out into the open, that through study, through testing, through just kind of systematic analysis, we will actually be able to plumb the depths of consciousness and solve these big problems of the mind. Yeah. Okay, moving on to number 4. We have another book. I'm just going to run over and grab it. I did a video when I got this book. It actually became one of my more popular videos. Rusty Brown by Chris Ware. I'm making a nice little stack for myself over here of beloved books. Rusty Brown. It's another graphic novel, kind of cheating again. This is the long awaited follow-up to Jimmy Corrigan, which for me was a completely life-changing book. Kind of the opus so far of Chris Ware. He's had other, I think Building Stories is maybe more known now, but Jimmy Corrigan was the one that I think, until this at least, was kind of considered like his work. Like this is the definitive work of Chris Ware. I read it when I was 13, Jimmy Corrigan, and it just forever changed what I thought comics were capable of. It truly expanded my horizons of what the medium was for, what it could do, how it could connect with you. Before that, I had read like Archie comics, Mad Magazine, like One Piece, other shonen series, battle shonen series. That's it. that's basically it. Garfield, things like Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, and Jimmy Corrigan changed everything. It completely redefined what I thought I could get out of reading a comic. Since then, I've read a lot of other Chris Ware stuff, a lot of his Acme Library series, some of which is now collected in this. Acme Library was his serialized. It just came out totally infrequently, totally sporadically, but it just kind of contained his latest comics and stuff. And Building Stories, which is a crazy experimental work that I'd love to show off in another video sometime. They're fantastic works, but I really wanted that Jimmy Corrigan experience again, of just this very standalone, epic, long graphic novel that would just blow my mind. And the whole time, Rusty Brown was in the works to some extent. That after I read Jimmy Corrigan, I guess maybe my cousin told me, or I looked it up or something, that his next project was going to be Rusty Brown. And I saw some very early excerpts of Rusty Brown. And since then, it's just been very elusive. When will this come out? You know, parts of it were in Acme Library, like 20 and stuff. And you're like, ooh, like, this is part of Rusty Brown, right? Like, what? How does this fit in with the rest? What is this even going to be about? When is it going to come out? And now, finally, it's here. It's here. It exists. It's here. It's crazy. I feel like I've been waiting like my entire life for this. Like my entire adolescent life. Going on from very young teenager. I wanted this one. So what is it? What lives up to all the hype? Well, this is just melancholy slices of semi-normal small-town lives as they intersect. That sounds like the sort of thing I would like, right? Yeah. It's a deep but compassionate but critical look into the psyches of such different characters, of people in wildly different stages of wildly different lives. Each chapter is kind of focalized through one character, and it totally reframes the storytelling mode into their eternal psychology. That the teenage girl has this sort of angsty diary type presentation to everything she sees and thinks, whereas the young superhero obsessed kid, of course a staple character in Chris Brown works, everything to him is like a superhero comic, and he's always lapsing into these fantastical imaginations. And so on and so forth with this whole cast. You experience long journeys through characters' lives, through some of the characters. Jordan Lint, of course, is kind of the most famous section. It was sold as one of the standalone Acme libraries and did very well. And again, it's this sort of feeling of eventually everything happens in these long life sagas. They're often very abridged, with just one page to the next, encapsulating dozens of years of their lives at times, but it's so compelling, so real, with this feeling of just going through it all, the eventfulness of a real life, which most fiction cannot even hope to measure up to. Sometimes I'm in tears at the futility of it all, just the sadness and the inability to escape in these lives, the dreadful routines, the dissatisfaction and disappointment. But sometimes I'm bawling. The end is so beautiful that I just cried my eyes out when I kind of finally put the pieces together and saw what was going to happen. And it's well-earned sentimentality. It doesn't feel like Chris Ware is just jerking at your heartstrings for the sake of it. It doesn't feel like it's easy manipulation, but instead just the long efforts of these characters and of this writing and of you and the reading, that you earn these moments of yes. I don't know, just yeah. It's quite the masterpiece. Talking about kind of the more technical side of it, how it's actually drawn. His technique has never been more refined. It's very masterful, and yet it's quite understated in this case. He's definitely had much more experimental works, much more kind of over-the-top and elaborate works. But here it's a really wonderful kind of happy medium between just a master in his craft and something that always captures the potential of experimentation where it exists. There's still a lot of indulgence to break into what I've always called the diagram space, like in Shaft anime and stuff, where instead of just saying something, you leap into the imagination to show it. But it's so deliberate in doing that it doesn't just kind of exist for the sake of it, but it characterizes, it sets an atmosphere. It sets off like every single page in this is, I think, like a work of art. A fantastic example right away that we see here. These snow-covered panels, the surreality of snow indoors, and then we break out into a fictional comic strip within the world of the series of Ear Man, the alias of childhood Rusty Brown, as he mourns his lost lover, and just this like one panel of reality showing what the kids are seeing as the two are invisible outside the window with the rusty doll. Like, it's so imaginative. It breaks out of reality so elegantly and like flawlessly, but with such deliberation that so much of it adds. Oh, there's so many. Like, literally every page I turn to, I'm like, oh yeah, that's such a great example of that. Oh yeah, this is really cool because of that one. Oh man, look at this paneling. Oh my gosh, look at this, the way that information is conveyed. I would just sit here all day. Okay. We gotta move on. This is gonna be such a long video. The art is, of course, hyper minimal, as you saw. The character designs are like iconified. It's just kind of circles and boxes and stuff. And yet the backgrounds, the illustrations are so richly atmospheric, so emotionally weighty. This perspective they give is just so huge. His very famous like kind of diagram pages of showing the history of a location, showing the genealogy of characters. Just this hugeness of perspective, and yet this like sincere, deep appreciation of minutia, of focus and stuff. In my own comic making, maybe you've read some of my comics. There's no bigger influence than Chris Ware, and this book again has really inspired me and changed what I thought was possible in the medium. Could I live up to Chris Ware? I don't know. Anyways, moving on to number 3. Which I guess I might as well go grab it. It's another big one. Ducks. Reading some ducks. This is Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellman. And this is the obligatory, super experimental, super inaccessible postmodern masterpiece that I had to put something like this on the list. It's basically just one long sentence, this entire book, interrupted by little interludes that are much more traditionally written about a mountain lion roaming around with her family. But yeah, it just goes on and on. There's no paragraph breaks. You can just see if we flip through it. It's just on and on like this. La 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 la. The observations and thoughts and feelings and memories of a Midwestern mom of 4. That's what we got here. That's what's going on. And movie plots and recipes and mega long lists of ecological disasters and foods and rivers that just go on page after page, the names of rivers. It's an overwhelming kaleidoscope of imagery and ideas. Going back to this idea that I talked about at some length with the Tao Lin book of observing good ones, of just small things that you notice about the way you think or ways of reinterpreting what you see in the world. This is a buffet of those. I can't think of any other books that have this many ideas in it. Just because it's just endless like that. It's just a non-stop buffet of these ideas. There's some extremely obscure references in this book. And when you catch one, you realize that so many of the other things that you thought were just kind of references to the character's own life or her own kind of internal memes or inside jokes with her family or whatever, you think, oh geez, is that actually like a reference to some other thing I don't know about? You feel stunned. You suddenly perceive the infinite depth potentially of this book. The one that got me fairly early on, and they're never like explained, you know? It's just that you kind of catch it. She says something about little dude, that's what they kept calling him. He was way out there. They just kept calling him little dude. And I was like, that's a reference to this like semi-viral clip that I saw on Reddit one day of these like surfer bro types that are way out on the ocean, and there's like a lizard for some reason. And they kept calling him little dude. Why are you so far out here? And she doesn't say like lizard. She doesn't say ocean. She doesn't say video. But I'm sure that's what it's referencing, is this fairly obscure, just like 1 in a million viral videos that came out when the author was writing this book, probably. Just like, whoa. And then hundreds and hundreds of internal references that refer back to things within the book, memes that are generated throughout the book until your inner memes, until you really understand them and it becomes this like second language to you, totally synced up with the narrators. It's a very, very unique and profound feeling. Just this richness, this interconnectedness that builds up as you read it, that it really feels like a language unto itself. In this hypergraphic attempt, hypergraphic, of course, referring to hypergraphia, which is a compulsion to write, an inability to stop yourself from just recording every single thought and feeling and observation you have. It's something I've dealt with in some ways before. It's a hypergraphic attempt to just encapsulate the totality of thought. And I think through that it succeeds in being perhaps the most complete portrait ever written of someone's internal life, of just what's going on in someone's brain. Some thought patterns are so stirringly familiar that they must either be universal, which would be amazing to tap into something that we all feel that I had never seen articulated before, or it's proof of some very special link between me and Lucy Ellman. And either way, it's a very profound feeling. One that sticks out to me is her talking about how she always feels a little bit anxious when she's going to deliver pies to one of her friends. How she knows that if the friend is in a bad mood for any reason, or even if she's just on the phone and a little bit short with her, or even if it's something totally explainable that has nothing to do with the narrator, that the narrator will still feel bad about it, that the bad feeling will stick with her like all day. And thinking like, oh, geez, I think that's like kind of true for me too. It's not like dramatically true. It's not, a crippling anxiety in my life or something, but that this is like a fear I've had that is so small, so minute that I wouldn't have articulated it. But it's true that I have this anxiety that if I go and meet someone at their house, that maybe they were just mad about something right before I got there, and that that bad mood will stick with me. Just so many examples of tapping into those like minutia of thought that normally just go by unspoken in your mind, that you don't ever capture, you don't ever notice this pattern. It's fascinating. And I think this is unnecessary. When I first started reading it, I was hoping that there would be no plot at all. That like nothing would happen, that it would just be her living a very normal, very repetitive life, and you would just see what she was thinking the whole time. But they eventually do weave a plot together, and it's a very eventful one, too. A lot of pretty dramatic things happen. And the way that you kind of realize what's going on entirely through the stream of consciousness is really neat and a very unique experience. For example, there's an arc where she has her car break down in the middle of the blizzard, and she's stuck on the side of the road, and she's waiting to get help. She's trying all these things. The entire like tone of her thoughts, her consciousness, like takes on this franticness, this dread, this feeling of remorse, of regret, of panic. So like seeing that transformation is really cool. Kind of putting together the true reality of the situation, like realizing how stuck she is alongside her. It's really, really neat. So even though I was hoping that this would be a super experimental, literally just stand around in your kitchen and think type book, I was impressed with the plot. And the way that the plot interweaves with the separate mountain lion segments is kind of cool too. It's a plot that does a nice job of reflecting our current social climate. There's a lot of Trump stuff, a lot of American politics, a lot of just kind of the state of the American life right now. It weaves all that stuff in really nicely without it losing any of its unique personality, with it still really feeling like everything coming through the narrator. And that these characters that you get to know so well, that you feel so intimately familiar with after living inside of her brain for over 1,000 pages, that these characters are reduplicated across America millions of times. All as unique, all with their own set of inner memes, their own set of memories, their own personal histories, and yet all the same, too, that they all end up in the same anxieties, that they all are subject to the same conditions. Even if they don't have the same level of drama as the characters in this book, that they're going through the same sorts of challenges, too. And it becomes overwhelmingly, profoundly sympathetic to just entire swaths of millions that you'll never know or meet. You feel like you know from reading this book. Ultimately, this is a novel of anxiety. That this is predominantly what generates her thoughts, what strings thoughts together, is worry, anxiety, a concern triggering another concern, triggering another concern. About the ceaseless informed worry of modern life. I think my favorite passage in the whole book. There's no way I'm gonna find it. What am I even doing? Is she kind of really starts freaking out, and suddenly it's just a barrage of her remembering all of these other incidents that she's kind of explained in more depth before, of like people being kidnapped and murdered, and this gigantic chicken coop that had millions of chickens that collapsed and all the chickens died. All things that really happened, by the way. Like, everything in this book is factual as far as I know. And it just like starts compounding and compounding and compounding. And she says something like, I really don't think that people back then were just so worried all the time. There's a very common theme that she's always thinking about Little House on the Prairie, and thinking about different events and episodes in Little House on the Prairie, and just kind of comparing her life to that. That basically the main theme is that Little House on the Prairie is like much, much harder than their lives now, but that she can't imagine they were just so worried all the time. I only had a slight hope of finding it because I remembered that it's at the end of like a segment before one of the mountain lion segments. I did find, though, this is another one of my favorite parts, is this long, long, long list of foods of the American diet. Look at that. And the way that she breaks into little commentary and stuff with specific entries. Oh man, it's Joycean. Before this, the only books I've read that had this sort of listing was Joyce. Anyway, it's crazy. I love it. I love this book. It's so weird. It's unlike anything else, but I love it. Okay. But then, despite all of this anxiety, despite all of this drama, all this tragedy, it's about the meaning that you can make to cope with it. And it's kind of inspiring that in the end, she has a very meaningful, beautiful life that we can see put together micro piece by micro piece throughout the book. Next, we have another cheat, I guess. We're including the entirety of My Struggle by Karl Ove Knausgaard, a gigantic 6-book series that I read through a lot of the last decade, actually. I think I started in 2014, 2015, and I read it all the way until the last book came out in early 2019, I believe. Is that right? No, it came out in like late 20... I think it came out in late 2018. Because I remember I finished reading it in Japan. And I was in Japan in January of 2019. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, anyways. This is the life in totality of this Norwegian man, recalled and analyzed over 3,600 pages. It's very long. I only have a couple of the books from it. Here's book 6. I think it's the longest one, but it's long. And they're all comparable. This is what? Yeah, 1,200 pages? Dude, it's long. Look at that thud. You hear that thud? That's a book. That's a book and a half. Anyways. Look at this pile. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's lit. Anyway. So he recalls his life in this very rambling, very fractal, non-linear fashion. He bounces from his childhood all the way up into the act of writing the novels itself. The final book is largely about the publishing and writing of the first 2 books. Everything is exposed. Not just for him. He definitely gets into all of the embarrassing details of his own life. But for his friends and family, too. He has no qualms whatsoever about publishing the personal details of the lives of people closest to him. And this was not uncontroversial. He got sued. This is actually kind of an edited version of the series before publication. When he was sending out advance copies, he got hella sued by his dad's side of the family. And as a result, I think a character got completely axed. and a lot of other things kind of got removed and downplayed and stuff. But like that was that was all they could do. Everything else made it in, and there's like a lot. It's quite interesting. If you read interviews with him now, he kind of says like, I don't know if writing this was actually morally just. I don't know if it was like a good thing to do. I don't know if I had the right to do that. But just that at the time he felt that he had to, that it was like a compulsion to finish writing these. Yeah, that's very interesting to me, and I guess it raises some questions maybe about the morality of reading them, but I don't know. It's like it's a friggin' masterpiece. I'm gonna read it. The depth of honesty in these feelings, in the unabashedness, the unashamedness, the uncensored, total exposure. I've been talking too long now. What am I trying to say here? The total exposing of the self really resonates with other unspoken elements of your own self, I think. His anxieties, his shameful thinking. It makes you think, oh, geez, like, no, I guess I do that too. I understand. I think I've been there too. But then it's nicely balanced by moments of just like, what are you on about? What the fuck are you on about, Carl? You crazy for this one. But it puts you at a nice distance from him, where he still feels very fascinating, very different, like really getting to know someone, like really finding all sorts of ways that you connect, and then all sorts of ways that are totally expanding to you, that are totally mind-blowing, that, what? Why would you think that? Why would you do that? It's compelling. It's very compelling. A project that contains within itself its magnitude, its insanity, its sacrifices, especially near the end when he starts writing these books themselves. But even in just going back to such painful times throughout his life, in really digging deep and analyzing how his own mind works, the fact that you can really tell the insanity behind this project, that he felt that he had to do this, that he had to write these gigantic dumps of his own mind. It's extremely compelling. It's really not like nothing else. The prose is sometimes stirringly beautiful. Such vivid images, such grand perspectives, such rich introspection. This is where it really succeeds. This is where it really becomes a masterpiece. Like, I think anybody that does this, anybody that writes this totally uncensored tell-all novel about their own lives is worth checking out. It's definitely notable, but it's the power of his writing. It's the fact that he's a really amazing writer that actually makes it so good. Such a masterpiece. And his drive for thoroughness and completion, he opens himself up to such free exploration. And what I mean by that is that he knew from the start that this was going to be hella long, and he was fine with it being hella long, and all he wanted to do was write and put as much of himself out there as possible. And so it feels so free that he'll talk about like I think this is something that actually happens, that he talks about going to the city to like see his friend. It makes him remember another time that he went to the city and went to this gallery. He talks about a painting he saw in the gallery. He gives his thoughts about the painter's life, the thoughts about how the painter's life connects to the sort of paintings he made, his thoughts about what he feels when he sees one of those paintings. Then he goes like, all of this was in my mind when I went to go see my friend. And so when I saw my friend, I was like rude to him. I was short with him because I was so clouded by my thoughts of this painting from when I saw it before. It's so free that he really feels like, okay, well, I have to get to the very bottom of that thought. Like, I have to truly understand like why I behave the way I behave. And I just love that, though. I just love the fractalness of it. I just love the freedom he has in telling these rambling, disjoint stories. Like, if you watch Keith's the YouTube channel, you know that's what I'm all about. Like, I love to be like, oh, you know what that just reminds me of? And just, go off. And that's why we end up with the videos that are going to be like an hour long. Topics in this book are all over the place. He talks about writing itself a whole lot. He talks about parenting. He talks about love. He talks about Hitler. And these are contemplated in what I could only describe as like spontaneous essays that suddenly were just totally broken from the narrative. And he's totally willing to devote like 30 pages to just his theory of writing, or in a very abstract sense what his experience being in love was. Or the Hitler one, which is like this much of this book, I think, like the middle third, if not more, or like a half of it right in the middle, is just all about it's not just about Hitler, but it arrives at a lot of trying to make sense of the monstrosity that is Hitler. It's really, really fascinating, really compelling, just his insights, just the ideas that it sparks within yourself, the questions that it leads you to ask. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. This sort of indulgence is just really admirable to me. This eagerness to see the depth of things, to not hold back from like really exploring why do you feel the way you feel. What does it mean when I have these sorts of thoughts? Insights from throughout his life have served to me as like a little guide. That I had a friend who also read this series. I talk to him like all the time. He's one of the people I talk to most. And we find ourselves referring to often just like a few kind of specific passages in this book of Nosgard talking about when he gets older, like Nosgard talking about when he kind of entered his 30s and entered his 40s, and kind of how his perspective has changed on things as he got older. And I guess because I can just relate to so much of the other thinking in this book, I find myself like anticipating that, it's probably how it'll feel for me too. Sometimes very dreadful. Oh God, I'm sure I'm going to start having a complex about that too. Oh God, oh no, I'm going to experience that realization at some point too. But all other times very encouraging. All other times it really seems like I too can have a lot of the meaning and beauty that he's able to capture in his life. Through my deep familiarity with Karl Ove, my long journey reading these books, moments of tremendous empathy and compelling distance, it really feels like by the end he was an old friend of mine, that he was someone I had known for all of my life and had always been talking to, always been thinking of, always been consulting with. That's how resonant his views become. Not that I always agreed with them, but that I always took them to heart, that I always deeply understood where he was coming from. And that's quite the experience, to truly like feel like you're making a friend through reading. Some of his descriptions, I think, will forever imprint themselves in my associations and expectations. And that's the sort of thing, talking about aging, talking about parenting, talking about love, that I'm like, that this kind of defines in my mind what those things might mean. There's one about love especially. Oh man, near the end of the 5th book, it's just like, yeah, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, that's what's up. I don't know. I can't be too articulate about it. Anyways, all right, that's my struggle, and after that, another cheater pick. We're picking another series. I don't actually have these books. I can't go run and grab them. I just read them all on my e-reader this summer. But they made a big impression, of course, because they hit number 1 on the list. I'll probably buy them at some point, because I do really want to reread them and reread sections of them and just immerse myself in them again and again and again. I absolutely love them. This is the Neapolitan Novels by Elena Ferrante, comprising of My Brilliant Friend, The Story of a New Name, Those Who Leave and Those Who Stay, and The Story of a Lost Child. HBO is making an adaptation of it. They've just done the first 2 books, I think, so far. Maybe just the first book, I'm not sure. I tried watching it and it just felt weird, because I had such a mental image of how it should look and feel, and it just was like very different. Like I don't know. It just doesn't seem right. I don't know if I'll watch it. At any rate, you can check it out. Like, if you're curious about this in terms of like the plot and stuff, the TV series I've heard is really, really good. So it's not going to be like a compromise. Okay. This is a 60-year journey through the lives of two women from Naples. There's a very complex web around them of families throughout generations that entangle them. And here I make a little abridged reference to a James Joyce quote. You speak to me of oh my god, it just went blank. It's like religion, society, family, or something? Religion, philosophy, family, religion, whatever. Politics, religion, society, maybe. These to me are nets that I try to fly by. This is Stephen Dedalus in The Portrait of the Young Man. And I think as much as these things are like established through the series, you see them as these nets to fly by. And again, this feeling of eventually everything happens. It's true for the My Struggle books too. That it captures the true eventfulness of a real life. I don't know. I feel like I haven't explained this concept very well. But it's like if you think about fictional stories of people, they're often really dramatic and crazy and like all this stuff happens. But then if you really think about like the life of a real person, all the stuff that happens in a real life, it's incomparable. The real life is like way more interesting. Way more stuff happens. It's like way more dramatic in totality, right? Just because fiction is often only just like a very brief snapshot. Even a story that tries to tell someone's entire life ends up being just like a connection of snapshots. So that it's only very rare masterpiece novels that can get this idea of eventually everything happening, of the true eventfulness of an entire life. Anyways, does that make sense? It's really hard for me to put this concept into words, but it's very dramatic. There's twists and triumphs and tragedies, but it's never so wild that it loses its heart. It never feels like a thriller. It never feels like you're more compelled by the events, by what might happen. You're always compelled by the characters, by what they stand for, by the feelings it generates within you. The web that's propped up, this web of families and stuff is propped up by the shifting society of Naples and the world at large. As you go through the decades, you see all of these topics emerge from just rumors and discussions to major aspects of the realities of their lives. Political movements and technology and just kind of the aesthetics of the world. They're really explored in quite some depth with very bold conclusions. But always by the characters. Always parse through these characters that you grow to know and love. It's never just for the sake of itself. It's never just in the way that Nosgard will just be like, and here's an essay on this Norwegian author that I like. But instead a way to enrich the characters, to enrich the setting, to make the characters more compelling to you, to make you understand them better. I really, though, cannot put into words the emotional experience I had reading these. Like, it's number one on my list, and just because the experience of it, just the amount that I was blown away by going through these is incomparable to anything else on this list. I marathoned through all of these books in about 2 months. It was a lot of reading during my quarantine vacation at some of my friends who... This couple that I'm very close with invited me over to quarantine vacation. It was just a really good time in general. Just a very meaningful, wonderful time of my life. And reading these during that time, having this be a major element of my life while staying there, I think contributed a lot. Never, I think, have I read books so feverishly, with so much emotional investment into them, with my heart held so tightly by each development, each character. Very few characters in the book were like wholly sympathetic, and yet I really cared about all of them. Even the ones I detested, I still cared about. I still felt so invested in what would happen to them, so compelled and caught up in their own perspective. Topics like love and longing and pregnancy and motherhood reach out and connect with me in a very deep, secret place, like in a place that I have a really hard time articulating or even kind of looking at, that I can only share with very few people in very specific circumstances. It felt like this book was having a very honest and open conversation with me about those sorts of topics, that I felt like I could really, in a very rare experience, connect to those emotions within myself. And here, I don't want to get super into it, but it's like, because I'm trans and I can't have children of my own and I'll never be a mother, reading so vividly, so closely and intimately the experience of characters becoming mothers and what motherhood means to them and stuff, things like that. No, let's not get into it. Probably start crying or something. It's and here I'm kind of repeating some lines that I said about Sangatsu no Lion back on the anime list, that this is a story of the connections that we have with one another, of what we can do to get each other through this life, of the beauty of really being with someone, of truly sharing things with someone, of supporting someone and being supported by someone, about living a life that's happy but meaningful, fun but beautiful. Yeah, I don't know. I can't really break this down too much more. It's what we want, right? It's the kind of life that we aspire to have. It's not just depicting that, but it's about that. It's about what that means. It's about how we can help each other get there. Someday, I think one of the things that stands out to me most about this book, in comparison with a lot of other books on the list, like this one has, a lot of sincerity behind it, of course, too, but it's very much kind of like an exercise. It's not totally fiction. It's like auto-fiction. It's drawn from his own life and experiences and stuff. It's not about creating characters and such. And this is also, again, extremely sincere and really trying to tap into the real emotions and feelings of people. But it's so experimental and bizarre and such a challenge to write and read and stuff that it feels like that there's like a formality behind these two. And when I write, it's often with that same sense that there has to be some sort of formal exercise, that it has to be some sort of challenge, some sort of modernism, I guess, or postmodernism behind this sort of mentality that a book isn't just a book, it's not just a story, but it's this kind of project of the self. It's this transformation into the real of the subconscious and the inexpressible and stuff. Whereas this is just a story. It's just a very compellingly told, beautiful story of some people. There's nothing experimental about it. There's nothing strange about it. It just wants to compel you. It just wants to emotionally affect you. And that's something that I've really struggled with my own work, is just like aiming for that. So it's really admirable to me, and it really speaks to me about, in the end, I still want to be a writer. In the end, that is like the thing that I would be able to do that would make me proudest of myself, is to write an amazing work of literature or something like a true masterpiece book. And this shows me like this is the sort of thing I want to make. Like more than any, I read Ulysses. Wow, I wish I could write something like that. This though is more really what I want to make. This is more really the story I want to tell. I don't know. Anyways, we've arrived at the end of the list. We did it. 10 books. Have you read any of these? Do you like them? What are your favorite books? Is anyone still watching? This is like an hour and a half to talk about 10 books. That's Keats, the YouTube channel for you. You know what you signed up for. So thank you for watching. I really, really love these books. I'm so happy that I took the time and the effort to share them with you and to try to articulate what I like so much about them. Please look forward to the next list, which I think will be about non-anime TV shows. Okay, bye.